Entrepreneurship, Chapter 5, Using Design Thinking. What is design thinking? Design thinking is identifying needs, creating solutions, tools, and entrepreneurs. This is the process that people go through who are successful entrepreneurs. They go through this process, design thinking. And it's really driven by needs and creating solutions, looking at people to see what it is they actually need, even when sometimes they don't even realize what they need, and then trying to figure out creative solutions to those needs. That's design thinking. So you look at the 5 skills of designers. Use observation, listening, emotional intelligence, problem framing, and problem solving. So observation is when you're watching people or you're watching situations to try to gain information and knowledge to kind of see, well, what's going on here? What am I seeing? Listening. Listening is actually listening to people. Listen to what they say. Listen to why they say they do certain things. Emotional intelligence is relating to people and getting on that level with them and share with it. And I'm going to elaborate about emotional a little bit more in a few slides. Problem framing, looking at to kind of see what's the nature and scope of the problem to get it framed. For instance, you can't build some furniture to put in a room if you don't know how big the room is or how big the door is to get the furniture in. And problem solving is once you frame those problems, then come up with solutions to resolve them and solve them. Design thinking is human centered. Need is desirable, useful, or required. Intersection of desirability, feasibility, viability. So when we look at the need is desirable, useful, or required, something that people need, they use or require to have. That's what you're looking at. We're not so much looking at to create something from nothing. We're actually looking at people, and people are we refer to as users. Looking at the users to see what they need. And I give you an example. You may have somebody who's a user of something, but they may not be the customer for it. You may come up with something observing a certain group of people and determine that these people, in order to do this service for another group of people, they need this. That's through your observation and finding something that's useful and in some cases required. And you have the intersection of desirability, feasibility, and viability. Desirability is what people like to have. Feasibility is it something that can work? Viability, is it something that can be profitable? It may not be financially possible or viable to actually take on this endeavor. So again, as I said, when we're looking at design thinking, we're focusing on the users. Watch people in an opportunity space. So if you're trying to determine to come up with something for a group of people, watch them. Watch what they do. Why do they do it? What were they doing? This is I call it your observation period. Think about what people need. Explore how people behave. Ask what they think. Emphasize with how people feel. So when you think about what people need, a lot of times it's not coming up with something all elaborate, whatever else. It could be something very simple or it could be something very complex. But you're looking at, well, what do they need? What could actually make things easier for them? Explore how people behave. You know, when people do this, when people have this, how do they behave? What do they do? Ask, what do they think when they're doing this? One way to know this is to ask them, you know, when I was observing this and I noticed that you did that, how did it make you feel? You know, why did you do that? You know, and emphasize with how people feel. Emphasize with how people feel is to connect with them. And I'm going to get into that in a few slides a little later about this. Skills to better understand others. Designing thinking requires empathy. Skills to understand others, better understand others. Understand why people do the things they do. This is really, when you think in terms of the connecting with folks requires empathy. One of the things it does requires empathy is for you to be able to relate and to what they do and to relate to them while they're doing it. And for some people who actually struggle with empathetic the empathy emotion or the thought that makes things very difficult for them when they're in leadership positions or they're trying to get certain things done. Now, I kept saying I was going to come back to empathy. So here it is. This is big. There are so many people who do not understand the difference between empathy and sympathy. So we're going to break this down for you. Empathy is when you share in an emotion with someone. Sympathy is when you don't share in it with them, but you may feel sorry for them. So I like to say empathy is when I share in your sorrow. Sympathy is when I feel sorry for you. One is actually bonding. Empathy is a method of ways that means that we can bond. Sympathy is a way of actually repelling. You know, I feel sorry for. Sometimes you could almost say I feel sorry for, or I have pity for you. And, you know, that's usually not associated with a good feeling for someone. So experience versus showing concern. One is experience, one is showing concern. Experience feelings with another person. Create a bond versus isolation. Empathy does all of those with the exception of the isolation. When you create a bond through empathy, you know, you can avoid using sympathy and create isolation for someone. Designing thinking requires empathy. So design thinking looks at emotional side, functional side of problems. We're connecting with people at that emotional level. And a lot of emotions can drive behaviors. And so when you see some problems, functional side of problems, it may be emotionally linked. Well, if you're going to try to connect with somebody in that way, you need to understand when this is centered around people, how do I connect with them looking at this emotional side? Design thinking process, 5 phases. So we've got 5 phases, Stanford's 5 phases. I'll talk about those in a few. First, we're going to talk about divergent thinking. This is think in terms of this. This is large scale thinking. When you got a lot of different things bouncing off the walls, when you're looking at divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is when you've condensed that down. From that large pool, you've condensed it down to a smaller pool. And now you can concentrate more focus on just a few things versus a lot of things. But this is how that process works. They go hand in hand. From looking at something in a large scale and a lot of different things, whittling it down to something much smaller and something more concentrated. The design challenge problem. So when we think about design challenge problem, this is a situation where stimulates design thinking process. And here's how it does that. The questions begin, how might I? And I'll give you an example. How might I improve this? How might I enhance that? How might I find a way to make this useful for these people? This is how that process would start. How might we, or how might I do these things? Emphasize. So when you're going back to the empathy, and this is so very important. This is when you see the world through other people. You have latent needs, observe people in their environments. So this is when you see the world through other people. Well, in order to do that, that means you have to be there with them. You have to get down at that level or get up to their level or whatever it may be. This is what requires leaders and entrepreneurs to be versatile. Connecting with people. And then you can see, once you connect with somebody in an empathetic way, then lots of times you can find out what their latent needs may be. And sometimes, even if you don't see it, they may tell you because you've established that bond with them. So you also get to observe these people in their environments. And that will tell you things that sometimes they don't even tell you, because there are certain things that people do and respond to and react to. We do it subconsciously and we don't know why we do it. We just do it. As someone who's actually design thinking, you want to understand, why are we doing that? And if you can understand the why, you might be able to come up with a need to be able to say, you know what, a solution to a particular issue or a problem. So design thinking process, we have 5 phases. Identify the problems encountered by users. Needs are verbs, solutions are nouns. So when you look at it, you look at the problems. We'll talk about the 5 phases in just a second, but the needs are verbs. So you were talking about some action here. This is when you have to actually talk about doing something. The solutions are nouns. Nouns with a person, place, or thing. And that means now you've come up with something, some type of way to resolve that through a noun. So now we're talking about the phases. So, we look at the IDT. IDT, addressing latent needs. Work with diverse group, brainstorming common technique. So when we look at this is about generating new ideas. We're trying to generate new ideas through this and working with diverse groups of people to try to get as much information as you can. Brainstorming is a common technique when you're trying to say, you know what, let's start taking a look. This is early phase. This is something when we're at the very beginning, when we're looking at that. Prototype. So when you see the prototype, ideas transfer into prototypes, model of the product being designed, rapid prototype. So this is when you generate, sometimes referred to as artifacts. They require user interaction, where you interact with the ideas with the user. Some type of way you're having them get involved because you're looking at these different ideas and these prototypes. And we think of that a lot of times in something that we want to get to. This is still early, so this is something we want to get to rapid and we're going to get to quick, because this is the process you must go through in order to advance in the decision-making process. So test. When we seek to answer questions, low-cost rapid prototypes, evidence new product can't work. So how do you find out things? You test it. You seek answers to questions. This is what the testing phase is about. This is exploratory. I'm trying to figure out, does this work? How am I doing that? We're conducting various tests. We're asking various questions, but all this is being done due to what I refer to as the testing phase. So if we a deeper dive into observation and interviewing. So if we look closely at monitoring users and potential customers. Remember I told you, a user doesn't always mean that they're a customer. That could be someone else. Interpreting observations. Observation equals what? Insight and why. So when you're thinking in terms of doing the interviewing, you want to I call it do your due diligence. Closely monitor users. And again, what are they doing? Why are they doing it? What am I seeing? And let me try to interpret what I'm seeing and what it appears to me. So this is a good question. This is the why. So as we look at a deeper dive into the observation interviews, so observation techniques. Practicing observation leads to meaningful insights. And realistically, you look at the framework, we look at small adjustments, increase powers of observation. So the observation can include not necessarily solutions, but it's giving you insights. And what are insights? Insights you get insights from observations. You do observations, and from those you can draw some insights. Meaning I have more knowledge of something in particular. I've learned more about this, and I'm more insightful now with that. So now I have a better understanding of it. So if you think in terms of insight, think in terms of having a better understanding. And these small adjustments increases power of observation. And you're only making small adjustments as you're doing this, because this is a situation where you want to make sure that you understand exactly what it is you see. And so realistically, the AEIOU framework is an acronym basically for a technique that's used to guide observation efforts. So this is about doing the observation here. Interviewing potential customers. Important to design thinking process. Feedback, interview, needs finding, interview. So one of the things when you're talking about doing this is crucial, because if you're trying to gather information, you got to interview potential customers. Here's how, when you talk about interviewing, you have to understand how to interview people, how to cold call on people. Now, I'll give you an example. If you just ironically walk up on somebody and say, hey, do you have some time for me to talk to you about a different particular subject? Usually they're going to tell you no. Now, if you walk up to them and tell them, hey, sir, do you have 1 or 2 minutes that I could actually talk to you about a particular subject? Okay, he may think 1 or 2 minutes that I can spare. And you have a much higher success of actually getting him to talk to you. So it's your approach. How do you start that? And that's part of your design thinking process. It's just how you approach people. Feedback interview. Talking to people and asking them questions, open-ended questions, and let them give you feedback. Now, here's one of the things you have to be really careful when you're doing this is you have to be quiet, shut up, and let them talk. You're trying to get knowledge from them. Don't interrupt them. Don't lead them, or whatever else. Let the answer be solely from them and not from you. Need finding interview. This is when you have a needs basis and stuff. You're looking at a situation where you have a particular need that you're working on, that you're trying to fulfill, and you're trying to gain information from individuals who could help you with that. Interviewing potential customers. Prepare for an interview. Think about who. Formula. So when you're thinking about the interview, think about who you're going to be talking to. I'll give you an example. Are you talking to the right group of people? And when you are talking to people, what type of people were you talking to? This is where you need to document who I talked to. And I'll give you an example. Age group, race, gender, ethnicity, these kind of things. Now, lots of times you can't ask people those questions, so you may have to make guesses on those. But you try to put as much information together as possible from this preparing for the interview. Be prepared for that. Interview the type of people and just don't be too selective. Interview a broad range of people, but also you can whittle it down. And like I said, know who the type, and then from there you'd say, okay, who are people I want to talk to about this particular type of endeavor? The formula is question, listen, and probe. Ask an open-ended question, listen to what they tell you, and then probe based on what they tell you. For instance, if I tell you, you ask me a question, you ask me, well, Gerard, do you like football? I'm like, yes. Okay, well, is that soccer or is that American football? Is that professional? Is that pro? This is what they mean by probing. Now you ask probing questions. Okay, you said you like football. Now, which sport are you talking about? Oh, I'm talking about American football. Oh, okay. So what is it that you like about that? That's probing. Interviewing, particularly conducting the interview. Have an approach. Listen actively, learn as much as possible. Again, as what I said earlier, understanding the approach is how you approach people. You may have good questions and you may hit the right target audience, but if your approach is not correct and subsequently nobody's willing to talk to you, you have to readdress that and figure out what it is that you're doing wrong. Actively listen. This means I'm actively listening to the things that they tell me. I'm either you writing it down as they're telling you, or you write it down shortly thereafter. Learn as much as possible. They are actually telling you things that you probably wouldn't know, or things that you didn't think about or would have thought about because you're not them. And you may not use the service or the product that they do. So learn as much as possible from the user or the customer. Interviewing potential. So after the interview, write down your observations, which I just said, they're still fresh in your mind. Look for these things, look for things and patterns. So as you write these down and you start getting several interviews, look for things and patterns that you may be seeing that are common as popping up. And you may notice something right there like, oh, wait a minute. I interviewed 15 people. Of those 15 people, 9 of them answered this question very similar. And you can use empathy maps. This is kind of, these are maps that kind of help you with your empathy and relating to people and getting on the level with them. And in our chapter 5 book, you actually can see an empathy map that you can actually use if you wanted to take a look at that. So service, design thinking, planning and organizing sustainable solutions, principles of service design, user-centric and concrete, holistic sequencing and visualizing. So when you look at the planning, organized, sustaining solution, basically what we're looking at now is having a system that you follow, that you go through. And that is something you consistently do. Always utilize the same process. Always utilize. Otherwise, you could have skewed information, not because of who you're talking to, but because you're following a different process when you're talking to different people. And again, you're looking at it as like a user-centric, concreted, co-created, holistic sequencing and visualizing. So when you see that, those are the things that you constantly do in each one of those. That concludes chapter 5